Hey, Tanya Taylor here of Grow Your Wealth. And today I want to talk about the racial wealth gap. I was on a panel last week, and the entire topic was around the racial wealth gap, how we view it from different perspectives. And there is so much information out there about it, and just about how long it will take to close the wealth gap, right? I have been talking about this for quite some time. I've spoken on different panels about it, and I've just been following it and trying to understand how best can we as Black people, yes, Black people, um, start to make changes and to chip away. Can we close the wealth gap in our lifetime? Most likely not. They said it's going to take 228 years. But what can we do where we are now in this space that can help us and also help our children so that they are not falling behind? There was actually a study done by the Federal Reserve that says even parents who make it to a certain income bracket, a lot of times what they're going to see is that their children, their wealth, and their career path is going to fall below their parents. So even things like that, we want to know that and be mindful of it so we could understand how we can best equip ourselves and equip our children so that they're not falling behind. Because if each of us do that, we're doing our individual part and collectively we're going to grow, right? All right, that's also part of why I really want to dedicate the rest of my life and the rest of my career to teaching people about personal finance and teaching people how to build wealth, because it's that important to me. It's important to us to stop this cycle of poverty. So there's a lot that created this racial wealth gap. And for those of you who don't know what the racial wealth gap is, there is a lot of data out there that talks about it. But essentially, if I were to sum it up in one sentence, is how much wealth the white people have versus Black people have, and how long it will take to close the gap. And as I said, around 228 years is what they're predicting. So not in our lifetime. In our lifetime. So, in part of my talk this past week, one of the things I went through is the history of how this came about. And the abbreviated version of this is when enslaved folks were emancipated, they got no land, even though they were offered promised land, they didn't get it. And so they were starting with nothing. And the whites had already built up some sort of equity for themselves, right? And that equity continues to grow through generations, and we're starting from scratch. We did start to make headways. At the time, it was 23 to 1. We did start making headways in the 30s up to the civil rights movement. And so we started to see a narrowing of the wealth gap. At one point, it was even 5 to 1. Compared to where we were coming from, to get it to 5 to 1 was really, really significant. But from 1980 to 2020, there's actually been a stagnation. And it's almost ironic because you would think that between 1980 and 2020, more Blacks have been entering the professions, we've been starting our businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So you would think that the gap would narrow, but it actually has been widening. When I was doing a little bit more in-depth research, there was a chart that really stood out to me, and that's what I want to talk about in today's talk. Where whites are putting their money and where Blacks are putting their money, and why we're continuing to see this widening of the wealth gap. So when you look at housing, Blacks have 59% of their wealth in housing, while whites have 38%. And one would say, well, that's a good thing, right? Because we have an asset and it's going to grow and we can pass it on to our children over time. But unfortunately, if you think about whites and their homes and Blacks and their homes, a lot of times our homes in the Black neighborhood are depressed in prices until gentrification happens, and then suddenly the prices go up. But a lot of times when gentrification happens, Blacks are kind of pushed out of the neighborhood, so their houses get sold at a lower value. And who gets the higher priced housing? The white folks who move in, because most time gentrification happens, it's white folks that are moving in. So even though 59% of our wealth is in housing, Because of that factor, because of the type of mortgages that we're generally pushed into, we have higher mortgages as well. So the equity in our houses might not be as high as we want it to be. So we're continuously paying this mortgage, and all of that is impacting us. Whereas the white folks, their house prices might be going up in value at a higher rate. Where whites, the next thing is businesses. So 24% of wealth of whites is in their businesses, while for us as blacks, it's only 13%. And some of that has to do with us just not setting up our businesses the right way, not operating our businesses the right way as well, and not because we don't set up a business entity. Because you hear that there are a lot more black entrepreneurs, especially over the past, I would say 5 to 10 years. So then what does our business look like though? And are we generating the income from it that's going to allow us to use our business as an asset and allow it to grow so that we can build wealth? The white people have done pretty well in building those businesses and getting the equity from those businesses, getting the income from those businesses. And so it's helped them tremendously. Where else do whites have their money that we don't have our money? This is one of the areas that I talk about ad nauseum. In the stock market, equities. 18% of their money is in equities. Only 7% of us as blacks have our money there. And if you look at where the stock market has gone in the past 40 years, it's no surprise that their wealth is like quadrupling. It's just increased exponentially because the stock market has done so great over the past 40 years, and we've completely missed out. In 2008, if we had started investing in the stock market, would have seen tremendous growth in our portfolio. Again, in around 2014, and then again in 2020, we would have seen growth. But we are afraid to get into the stock market, and so we're really, really missing out on that. And as Black people, and especially Black women, we need to take that fear mask off and really start getting the knowledge that we need and start investing, because putting your money in a savings account is not going to get you the type of return. Yes, interest rate has increased, so you'll get about 5% now if you put your money in a savings account. But if you're thinking of growing long term, that's still not enough. Inflation at some point last year was 7.5 or up to even 8%. So trying to diversify in such a way and putting your money in equity is going to really help to build our portfolios so that we're not just relying on having our money in housing. And then when it comes to liquid assets, 17% of whites' assets are in liquid assets, so they could have access to cash easily. We have 13%, not significantly different, but since our overall assets as a group is a lot smaller than whites, even though we have 13%, it's still just not enough. And unfortunately, the last category that they have is other non-financial assets. And that's where we outpace whites. Non-financial assets are like your cars, your boats, they're usually depreciable. That means that they're not growing in value. We have 8%, whites have 3%. So they're not putting their money in things that are not going to give them income over time. So as blacks, we have to start shifting our mindset about, how do we grow wealth? How do we build wealth for our children? How do we build wealth for ourselves? Take a look at the model that has worked. If it has worked, then maybe we want to look at it and emulate it too. We don't want to always emulate everything that other people do, but if they're building wealth and we're always trying to play catch up and we have this wide gap, what are they doing that we can do? I know for myself, that was one of the things that I looked at when I was in my 20s, and I was working as a babysitter, and I saw these people. It wasn't their income. The guy was like a drummer. He was home literally every single day. And the mom, she didn't make that much money, but they lived in some amazing brownstone in Manhattan. How were they getting their money? And it was from investments. And so I remember seeing that. I remember being at Goldman Sachs and seeing these bankers and hearing them talk, even though they made great money, but they talked about their investments. So what did I do? If that's the way they make money, I want to learn how to make money like that too. And so that's why, when I talked to my friends about starting that stock market investment club, that was the whole reason why. We didn't know anything about how to invest, but I was like, if they're doing it, We're going to learn to do it. And that's what we did. And that's what got me started in learning how to invest in the stock market and continue to invest in the stock market and continue to build wealth so that my children are not going to be in that percentage of folks who are having to start from scratch again, right? It's building up that foundation. And so I'm challenging each of you that are watching this now to think about what can you do to help to close the wealth gap for your family. Let's say, or just to put a dent in it, how can I make something different so that I'm not starting from scratch? Many of you that are watching this now, like myself, you had to figure it out. You didn't have your parents, probably didn't even have your parents to help you to pay your college tuition. You had to take out student loan, right? Because your parents were still struggling to pay their bills. You probably had to and still have to help your parents with their bills because they're not able to afford it. So how great would it be if you were able to create something different for your children and for yourself so that you could live the life that you want to live? So I thought it was important to come on and really just talk about the wealth gap and talk about the impact, but also share with you that there is something that you can do about it instead of just looking at it and thinking that it's hopeless, but thinking what that one tiny thing that I can do for myself and for my family that's going to change how we move going forward. That's what I wanted to share. I also, as you guys know, I have been talking about the investing in the stock market class, which I am offering. I really want to start a cohort of folks learning to invest and just growing together as a group and as a community, investing and sharing different tips and strategies, and also sharing different stocks that they're investing in. So that's something that I have ongoing. I have free live training on Saturday, so you could join me on a Saturday, learn about it, join my program, and let's start building wealth together, guys. Like, we cannot continue like this. We have to individually figure out how we start building for our children, knowing that we're not going to be able to close the wealth gap for a long time, but we can put our own small dent in it for our families. I'll see you guys in the next live.